This is about reference tables, and when to use reference tables, and when should you use hubs and essentially hubs linked satellites, right? With data vault entities. So let me just read this. It's a quite long on text. I'll come back to that. We have a data vault 2.0 implementation. We have in Excel sheets 50 tables with static data that we need to add to the data vault because they want to consume it somehow in the business logic or whatever. Here's how it's maybe working. We have tables with orders and one table with static table called profit center. This profit center has special attributes assigned to specific values of company codes. If order with specific company code ID, which is by definition the business key, is found in table profit center, attributes from this table are added to orders. We've enhanced attributes of order. Okay. So in table 2.0, do we really have to use hubs, satellites of profit center table, and of course link it between it and satellite of orders, for example, or is reference table perfectly suitable for this? The data in profit center are always static with limited rows of maximum tens or hundreds of rows with 2 to 5 columns, data changed quarterly and only maybe a few rows. So this sounds to me like reference data. It's number one. There's some reference data has some characteristic and compared to, let's say, your data that describes your business objects. And give an example. Typically, when you look at your business objects, customers, products, stores, and so on, even stores could be borderline, but customers and products, for example, you generate these the records itself on a frequent basis. When there's a new product, you create a new product record. When a customer comes in and signs up for your service, then you have a new customer number that you assign and also descriptive data and so on. So we generate this business data all the time. And it describes the business objects, right? And as your business objects go through your business processes, they emit data essentially. That's a side effect of executing the business processes with the business objects. They generate data, and that data gets collected, and we later analyze it. That's the basic, or capture it first, and then later analyze it. That's the basic idea. So, but then you also have other data, and you realize that there's reference data, and reference data is not really a business object of yours. It is more a it's some data that describes your business objects. There might be even code. There is often code involved, like an ISO code or a profit center code or some maybe some color code and so on. But these codes they describe your business objects. What's the color of the product? What's the currency of the list price of the product, for example? What's the contract type of your contract and so on, right? So they're merely used for describing your business objects, but they're not their own business object by themselves. And they're relatively static. So how often do you introduce a new color? How often do you introduce a new contract type, right? They're relatively static. Yes, there might be a few changes once in a while. Automotives, they typically introduce a new color or a couple of new colors every year. For new models, the next, I don't know, yellow, brown, shiny color, that's the next trend color for the next summer. I don't know, right? But I'm not sure. So, but that's the idea. So they introduce these colors, 2 colors per year. That's how stable it is, right? So that's the first thing, to identify when do we have business objects, data about business objects, and when do we have reference data that describe our business objects. And the problem is, it's not always black and white. It's not in most cases, not as clear as that, right? When you look at, let's say, customer data and product data, it's relatively clear. Those are your business objects in many cases. But then when you look at, and on the other hand, you have, let's say, country data. You're not the ISO Institute, most probably. Well, I'm not sure who's here on the video or is watching this. But you're not the ISO Institute. So, and even if you're the ISO Institute, to be honest, the country names or the classifications are relatively stable. I truly believe that even the ISO Institute will consider the country codes as reference data, right? So it's a relatively clear case. But then there's a lot of gray area in between. The gray area, like profit center, for example, is a good case. It depends where you sit. If you sit inside, let's say if you just have to book costs against the profit center, for example, yeah, it's reference data most probably, right? Well, talk to the accounting guys. They will tell you otherwise, right? For them, it's the basic, one of the most basic business objects that they deal with every day. So depending on the context, even inside your organization, you might have a different view on that. And it's often not a clear case. Is it like a more like an object, business object, or is it more like reference data describing our business object? It's often not clear. The good news is it doesn't really matter. And I have to be quoted, if you want to quote that statement, it must be quote inside the context of this whole video, right? Because it's not that such a good quote. The thing is this: it doesn't matter because if you make some mistake now, if you make a decision that says, okay, let's model this data as business data, as a hub and satellite, for example. That's how we model data about business objects. Or we model it as a reference table somehow. That's how we model reference data. The worst case that can happen is that you oversimplify your model or you make it too complex. But in both cases, it's a valid model. And valid here means we can always reconstruct the original delivery. And if that's the case, we have no data inconsistencies at least. All data is consistent. And if that's the case, we can always derive any target model from a valid raw data model. Anything. Typically star schemas and snowflake schemas, but we can also derive a better raw data vault from it in refactoring, right? So if you made a mistake, you will see down the road if it's a good or bad decision, and then you can fix that essentially. You don't have a consistency issue essentially. So that's why it doesn't really matter, because you can fix it later. That's what I'm saying. So that's the number one. Don't discuss. And the thing is this: if you discuss the case now, is this a profit center? Is this a reference table or not? We can discuss this here for hours, right? And months. Really, I've seen this where they discuss this question here or a similar question for months. I only have like 10 minutes, right? 10, 15 minutes. So, and I'm going for it already. So we don't have the time here. Now, the thing is this: even if you discuss this 15 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days or 5 months, you don't know. Because you have to deploy it into production, and then you see the impact of your modeling decision when users are starting to use your data, when you try to deliver dimensions and facts based on that. That's when you know, in production, not in your development environment, right? So when people are using your data, which means that, let's make a quick decision, see where the data tends to. Does it tend more to business objects, or does it more tend to reference data describing your business objects? So it's like it's really like a pendle, whatever. So where does it tend to, right? Left or right? That's the thing. So, and then make a decision. You're in the gray area most probably, because we're discussing this already, right? So gray area, you can't make the best decision anyway. Well, not for every use case. So try to make the best decision with the knowledge that you have. And if that was a wrong decision or not a good decision, not the optimal decision, then we can refactor it later. So let's say for the profit center, I would agree. There's a lot of indicators here for me why I would tend to model this as reference data. Stable data set. It comes from an Excel, where that doesn't mean anything, but it's an Excel with static data. That's a key trait here for me. Static data, only a few changes once in a while, only a low volume of data set. That's all indicators for me that it could be reference data. Now, if that's the case, you would then model the reference data as either a reference table or a reference hub and a reference satellite. And because there might be some changes once in a while, and because I'm assuming, so I'm not sure what this context is, like what industry you're in and so on. But if you have to, let's say, even minor auditability requirements, if you have to prove and be able to reconstruct old reports that you ever shipped out to a business user, if that's the case, I would strongly recommend a reference hub and a reference satellite, and not just a simple reference table. Reference table is essentially add the code as the primary key. Your reference code becomes the primary key of the table, and then everything else, all the attributes that describe your reference code, like the 2 to 5 columns here, those would be just payload of the reference table. Flat and write structure, no history, just the current state of the data, type 1. Problem is, if there's an update on the descriptions of the reference data, you have to run an update on this table, which means that you not only lose the old descriptions of the reference table, this update will affect your old reports as well, your old dimensions as well, because they will change, right? So we use this pattern initially sometimes, but nowadays, because more and more customers have increasing requirements for their data delivery or for their solutions, they have more and more auditability requirements, but maybe from auditability, but also from development sometimes, right? So they want to be able to reconstruct all data and so on. We typically use a reference hub and a reference satellite. And the idea is this: the reference hub is just like a hub. That's why it's called hub, apparently. But much simplified, it's just a code list, right? It's just a list of codes. Maybe you have a load date in there, record source, but no hash key. That's for sure. No hash key in there. Keep it simple. The code becomes the primary key of your hub. and then of the reference hub. And then you have a reference satellite attached to it, just like any ordinary satellite attached to a standard hub. But because your parent doesn't have a hash key, you can't have a hash key in the satellite either, in a primary key, right? So we use the code from the parent and the load date, when did you receive the data, as a primary key inside the reference satellite. And then those 2 to 5 columns that you reference here, those 2 to 5 columns we add into the satellite. If there's a change, we add a new delta with a new load date for the same code, a new delta into this reference satellite to capture the change. That's a very basic idea. And then typically when you have, let's say, some data in a descriptive satellite on some booking, for example, you would reference the you have a code for the profit center inside these let's say nonsense link, and with this code you could now, if you think complicated, you could now join from the non-historized link with your bookings into the reference hub for profit centers, but there's only the code, and that code is also in the satellite. Now you have to join from the hub to the satellite, or just join directly to the satellite, right? So that's what we do. So select the data from the non-historized link, and with that code inside your transaction, you join into the reference satellite to get the descriptions for your profit center. That's the basic idea. There's a longer story with the dates, because the load date will not match your transactions. So I would say the join would be quite expensive, but that's why we also have maybe a reference. Am I dead here? I believe my video is frozen. That's why so that's why I think my video is still there. I hope, at least. Let me just double check this. Let me turn off. Okay, yeah, it works again. So I hope at least my voice was there. So, but the idea is that yeah, please confirm. So I'm not sure. So sorry, now I'm getting confused. So the idea is that we can also have something where we add some, let's say, another reference satellite in the business world, where we prepare these daytime stamps to align that with your information delivery. That's another story. So yeah, okay, perfect. The video, at least the audio is still working. Okay, and video should work as well. So yeah, so there's some options where you can align the changes on your reference data to your information delivery. The trick is the snapshot date in the business vault satellite. That's cool. So yeah, so that's the idea. So yeah, so but it's beyond the scope of this question essentially. So yeah, so I would go for a reference table most probably, and I would go for a reference hub and a reference satellite these days. That's our standard pattern we use at Scale3. That's how we model reference data, because it captures these changes which you have on your changing reference data, right? So that's what I would use essentially. Now there's one more caveat here, because I try to reduce the text size a bit. So I asked essentially Gemini from Google to essentially reduce the text and shorten it and so on, right? It had some interesting answer, a good answer actually. So maybe it's killing my job, we'll see. But on the other hand, it also made some huge mistakes. So let's do this. So I have a video stream coming up just in like 15 minutes. Where we do a live stream. So essentially you can join me. I have a guest today where we talk AI and data vault essentially. Question is roughly, is AI killing the data vault? And I will pick up this question here again, because I want to talk about my results from Gemini. What was the good thing about it? Where my heart sank essentially into my stomach and was like, oh, my job is at risk. And then I realized, well, not completely. So let's talk about that. That's coming up in 50 minutes at 11:30. And I see a couple of questions here. From Michael, you said the question here initially. So let me just jump in on your comment here. Business requirement is not to track history and update all data based on latest updates and profit center data. So in this case, yes, if that's the business requirement, well, wait for it. That could be the business requirement for your information delivery, right? That's the thing. Now, you're talking to the first users, and that's a business requirement from them. And I would believe my users' business requirement only for one sprint. Because next sprint, you talk to the next business users, and they might want to apply these, they might want to have history in the reports, right? So, and I'm not sure, maybe you can type in the industry you're in. If you're banking, finance, government, could be interesting, because they could also, telecom. Yeah, could be also a case if you're dealing with a regulatory project in a telco, for example. So, in this case, you have to prove what data was delivered and what reports you send out. If that's the case, you have no choice anyway. And the thing is this, let's say your business account is that. I would still tend to use a reference hub and a reference satellite. Why? Because in information delivery, I can still decide which delta to apply. I'm applying only the latest description of my reference data, the one with the highest load date, right? Or the open load end date virtually. So that's the delta, the latest delta for every code. That's what I'm using my dimensions. So that meets your requirement, your business requirement. But if the next user comes in and says, well, I would like to see history, then you're not screwed. You don't have to reload your reference data again. You have everything, right? It's just that you present only the latest delta in your dimension for now. But the next user comes in and says, well, I would like to have a type 2 dimension for profit center. No problem at all. We have that, right? So that's why I would tend, even in your case with that business requirement, I would tend to use a business hub and a business satellite. It sounds complicated actually, but it's not. And the usage is also very simple. You just have a code list, that's your reference hub, and you have a satellite, code, and load date. And then you have the 2 to 5 attributes as descriptive fields in the satellite, right? It's just a primary key is different. And then when you join from your reference data, from your satellite, where you refer to the profit center, you use the profit center code from your satellite describing your booking or whatever, or the nonsense link or whatever. You take a code and join directly into the reference satellite based on code and go for the highest load date. That's the delta you want to present and use to describe the profit center inside your booking, for example. Now, and then you don't have to create a link because we're joining the reference data, reference hubs, reference satellites directly. There's no link between a, let's say, a non-hysterized link or a hub inside your typical raw data vault that describes your business objects, right? The customer hub and the product hub and with its satellites. You don't create a link between those hubs in the raw data vault and your reference hubs. The reference hubs just stay there. And we join the data based on the code. And again, you join directly from the satellite into the reference satellite. The thing is this, based on the deltas in your raw data vault satellites, and I'm struggling with saying raw data vault because all these entities are part of the raw data vault. We consider them as part of the raw data vault, right? It's just that we have standard satellites where we capture raw data about your business objects, and we have reference satellites where we capture descriptions about your business objects. So the delta that it captures your raw data about the your business objects is standard satellite. The standard satellite will it's delta driven, right? So you capture all the changes. If the profit center changes, you get a new delta. And you can align this delta even in a type 2 dimension. Let's say your next user comes in and says, well, what about history? You have the load date from the delta in the satellite describing your product. And this load date you can use again to join against the reference satellite to find the most recent delta according to a load date. I'm not talking about an efficient join, right? That this will be inefficient on one hand. On the other hand, the reference satellite, as you said, is a relatively small table. So even these inefficient joins should work out actually. And if not, we can talk about pit tables and all the other tricks, but not a link table. So there's no link between a standard hub and a reference hub, for that matter. That's the idea. And typically we resolve these codes in the dimension directly. So what you do is you create a dimension, and from a starting point, you just, let's say, create the dimension based on the business keys in your hub, join the satellite to describe the business keys, and then you end up with a dimension with these codes in there, right? And then you say, well, these profit center codes I can just explain in more detail. Then inside your dimension view, you join the reference satellite based on code, based on load date, to get the descriptions for your code. And that's what you then add to your dimension, essentially. That's the idea. So it's all in most of that happens in the dimension view, except when you want to use the codes or have to use these codes inside the business logic. Sometimes we have business logic that says where you have to map these codes first, and then you can apply the business logic depending on the region or whatever, right? So then we might have to do it. So Michael, to conclude, if I understood correctly, I can join orders satellite directly using foreign key with profit center satellite, unlike between the two standard satellites. Yes, but here's the other thing. Yeah, that's correct. Yes, so you join from one satellite to the next, essentially, inside your dimension view. That's what we do, essentially. But here's the other thing. And but we're in good time saying it's a good question, good talk, good discussion. And again, we have a live stream coming up, and you can ask questions, right? So if you have more questions, or if you want to extend on this question, I have to go in 3 minutes or something to start a live stream, but then we can continue the discussion on the live stream essentially. The thing is this, and check out our YouTube channel or the LinkedIn channel where you will find those the upcoming live streams essentially. The thing is this: I once had a customer where they had some data in a raw data vault. So some data was in this satellite, and the other data was in the other satellite. And then, but there was no link. I mean, satellites describing hubs, right? But there was no direct connection from this one hub to the other hub, or maybe indirect. There was no link, even not an indirect link from one hub to the other hub. So you could not do a join, right? Well, I was like, but you have the data in the satellites. And you could actually join data based on the data in the satellite A. You join the data to other descriptive data in satellite B. So you could perform a join. It's just that the data model didn't link the data. And I'm like, well, why don't you just join? Right? So just go for it. The data is there. It might not be the most efficient join because you're not joining on hash keys, but that I don't know, to be honest. So it depends really on the data, how large the business keys are and so on. But if you can run your query against the data you have, just go for it. I wouldn't change the model for that, right? That's it. The raw data design is for capturing the data. For querying the data, it's most often very helpful, but it doesn't mean that you have to have a link between those two satellites somehow, like an indirect link via the hubs, right? Yeah, it might be there, and it's often there. Like in 99% of the cases, there is some relationship, and we use this relationship to establish the relationship between the data. That's what the link is for, right? But it's not required. So if I have the data, if I can join the data based on descriptive data, I'm going for it. There's no reason not to do it, right? That's what I think. So, and that's what we do a lot with star satellites and reference satellites to describe your business objects in more detail. We join from the code that you have in your star satellite, join directly into the reference satellite. We have to find the right delta, the latest delta, right? But again, small data set, just go for the highest low data essentially. Get the descriptive data from the reference satellite and enrich your dimension with it. That's the basic pattern for querying or for consuming reference data during query time. That's what we do. Or in your business vault entities when you have to apply it, or when you have to apply some mappings for your business logic, very common pattern as well. We do this in the compute satellite essentially, same pattern. That's the basic idea. Cool. Good question, good discussion actually. Good. Thanks for the interactive follow-up questions here or follow-up comments. I think that added some good value to the discussion today. So yeah, I'm jumping for the next call for the live stream essentially. If you have a question like this, use this form behind this URL, or better even, add your question to the YouTube link, YouTube videos. We're going to pick them up from there and then answer them in the next day or Friday. Thank you for joining us today. Remember to subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. To build a scalable design data platform, read a free Data Vault Handbook by scanning the QR code or following the link. Bye, guys.